If you have played Ocarina of Time, then you already know that the Hyrule in this game has a problem. A big problem. The Kokiri Forest's Great Deku Tree has been cursed, Goron City is facing starvation, and Zora's Domain is struggling with Jabu Jabu's parasitic invasion. All three of the Kingdom of Hyrule's major allies are suffering due to the actions of a wicked man from the Gerudo tribe. Ganondorf, the King of Thieves, has already inflicted serious, sometimes irreversible damage on every colony in the game before it even begins. With everything so clearly falling apart around him, you would think that the King of Hyrule would be more aware of the current conditions of his allies, right? He definitely should know that the man in front of him, swearing his allegiance, is the one responsible for these evil deeds, right? Even his own daughter is aware of Ganondorf's true intentions, and yet the king still refuses to believe it. Perhaps there's something that the king knows that we don't. What if we are the ones who simply don't understand? If that's the case, then this is going to be one tough nut to crack. Thankfully, I have Wiz Catches Lightning joining me today to help us get to the bottom of this potentially very misunderstood King of Hyrule's mysterious actions. Take it away, Wiz.
Thanks for having me, Geist. Ocarina of Time, admittedly, doesn't give us very much information about the King of Hyrule. However, if you know just where to look, then you will start to find some pretty interesting connections. Let's begin by familiarizing ourselves with the king on a baseline level. If we talk to the dancing couple in Castletown, the woman tells her partner that he's handsome, just like the King of Hyrule. Usually in Zelda games, the king is depicted as an older man, but this line of dialogue may suggest to us that the king in Ocarina of Time hasn't graduated to Silver Fox status just yet. The man then tells the woman that she's more beautiful than Princess Zelda, which is a, pretty odd thing to say when you think about it. Why is he comparing her to the king's daughter instead of the queen? Is the queen no longer in the picture? This might actually be the case, since there isn't a single line of dialogue in the entire game that mentions or even implies the existence of a Queen of Hyrule. What could have happened to her? We'll explore more into the history of the queen a bit later. But what else is there to know about the king? Darunia, the Goron chief, tells us that he and the king are sworn brothers, something that the Gorons only acknowledge after demonstrating a major feat of manliness, suggesting that the relationship between the king and his allied rulers was very strong. We're beginning to get a better idea of the type of person the King of Hyrule really was, as he absolutely seems to be in his early years, maybe even his early 30s, if he's been goofing around with the Gorons. Maybe it was the king's age, and thus his inexperience, that brought the kingdom of Hyrule to ruin. Then again, maybe not.
The common perception of the king in Ocarina of Time is that he was simply a blind, arrogant fool who refused to recognize the threats to his kingdom, a man who disregards his own daughter's prophetic dreams. He, more than anyone, should be well aware of his family's heritage. The royal bloodline contains mystical properties, which is a widely known fact at this point, and yet the king still doesn't acknowledge Zelda's warnings. Even Impa, the leader of the Sheikah, who are essentially Hyrule's Secret Service agents, believes Zelda's dream. There must be something else going on behind the scenes that we are unaware of that encourages the king to seemingly remain ignorant, almost as if on purpose. That is because the king does know something that we don't. You see, he's been playing his cards very carefully for a very long time. He isn't nearly as inexperienced as his youth would suggest. In fact, he is far from it. This king, before the events of the game, has very recently been through a civil war. He emerged victorious in the sense that he successfully united Hyrule under one banner, bringing peace once again to the land. He's demonstrated his capabilities as a competent ruler already, so why is it that he's showing signs of weakness now when all signs are pointing to Ganondorf being the root of it all? Well, I've got a theory on why this is happening. Two theories, in fact. Before we spill the beans, let's start by recounting a few events that take place during the game to help us better understand the king and his situation.
As Gossip Geist mentioned earlier, there was a civil war just a few years before the events of the game. During this war, many lives were lost. Two of those lives belonged to the Composer brothers, Sharp and Flat. The king ordered them to research the magical properties of the royal family's bloodline and figure out a way to utilize this power through other means. They were eventually successful in their experiments, allowing them to manipulate time through playing specific notes on an ocarina. Ganondorf caught on to their efforts and wanted to steal the information, but the Composer brothers fought back. Knowing full well that the discovery they've made should never fall into the hands of evil, they sacrificed themselves to protect their findings, falling victim to Ganondorf's wrath. This proves that the King of Hyrule is well aware of the magical abilities that the royal bloodline carries. Otherwise, he wouldn't have known to instruct someone to look into it. This also tells us that the king is aware of the fact that Ganondorf is interested in the research on how to manipulate time through an ocarina. The king has a pretty good idea, based on this information, of what Ganondorf is truly after, which is a method to open the door of time, the entrance to the sacred realm. If the king already knows this much, then why does he still play along with Ganondorf when he eventually pledges allegiance to the Kingdom of Hyrule? Well, it's simple. He has no other choice. Not because he can't do anything about it, but because he shouldn't do anything about it. It would go against his strategy if he were to act now. As much as it might seem like the king is failing his kingdom, on the contrary, he's doing everything in his power to stick to the plan.
You see, when you first meet Sheik, who is later revealed to be Zelda in disguise after pulling the Master Sword, they tell you of an old prophecy passed down by the Sheikah clan that states, when evil rules all, an awakening voice from the sacred realm will call those destined to be sages, who dwell in the 5 temples. Together with the Hero of Time, the awakened ones will bind the evil and return the light of peace to the world. Sheik then says that Link looks like the spitting image of the legendary Hero of Time from those old stories. If such a legend truly does exist and it's well known among the Sheikah, then it's safe to assume that the king is also aware of it. But wait, if both the Sheikah and Zelda have had the same prophetic warning, then why would the king still not believe it? Actually, he does believe it. He believes both of them. The reason why he tells Zelda that he doesn't believe her dream is because he can't use a child's dream as evidence to legally convict Ganondorf of a crime. If he were to act upon his daughter's warning, politically speaking, it wouldn't be a very wise move to make. Imagine for a moment that you were a Gerudo, and your king was sentenced to death for crimes he never committed. The only explanation that the King of Hyrule is able to offer is that within the dream his daughter had, there were dark clouds in the sky. You'd be absolutely up in arms immediately upon hearing such an unbelievable reason. The newly kindled relationship between the Gerudo and the Hylians right after the Civil War's conclusion united them would be disrupted once again, and retaliation would commence. The king is avoiding another all-out war by remaining willfully ignorant of all the obvious warning signs. He's waiting for the right opportunity to act, and unfortunately he knows that this will lead to the inevitable destruction of his kingdom. He knows that it isn't the right time to do something about it. You might even say that he knows it isn't the right timeline.
Thanks to the legend of the Hero of Time that Sheik tells us, and the fact that the king is more than likely aware of this legend, he knew from the very start what the fate of his kingdom was going to be. All he could do was simply wait it out until the time came. The king, more than anyone, knew that the legend of the Hero of Time was true. That fabled hero was his own son, after all. Before your eyebrows violently leave Earth's orbit in protest, please, allow me to explain. During the Civil War, 10 years before the game begins, a Hylian woman, wounded from the flames of battle, arrived at Kokiri Forest carrying a baby boy. She presented the boy to the Great Deku Tree for protection, who immediately recognized that the child was to play a crucial role in the fate of Hyrule's future. He accepted the child, and the woman then passed away from her injuries. This woman, who was originally thought to have been a random citizen of Hyrule, could in fact have actually been the Queen of Hyrule herself. Not just anyone can enter the Kokiri Forest and then proceed to demand an audience with the Great Deku Tree. If you need a visual reference, just look at Skull Kids and Stalfos. Those are Hylians who fell to the namesake of why we call the surrounding area the Lost Woods. At a time so sensitive, amidst the Civil War, you'd think everyone who tried to enter the forest would be misdirected and barred from entry by the illusory magics of these forbidden woods. This woman who fled with our infantile Hero of Time, however, was allowed entry. This could explain why there's no mention of the Queen in the entire game, and why the young man in Castletown doesn't refer to the Queen, but instead to Princess Zelda. The Queen has long since passed away. When we first start the game, we see Link having a nightmare. Within this nightmare, we see events that occur further along in the game. Wait a second. Doesn't this mean that Link is having a prophetic dream, just like Zelda did? When you first meet Zelda in the courtyard and you tell her your name, she says it's strangely familiar to her. This might have made people assume that she's referring to the time travel aspect of this game, but this is the first time we ever canonically meet her. At this point in time, we have never interacted with Zelda in any way, unless it was at birth. Furthermore, it doesn't make sense for Zelda to send a prophetic dream to a boy she's not aware of, let alone acquainted with. Link had this dream independently of Zelda. The Composer brothers tell Link that when they look at him, they're reminded of Princess Zelda, which is a strange thing to say, considering the last time they saw her was most likely when she was a baby, unless she periodically visited Kakariko Graveyard or something. Two children, roughly the same exact age, both sharing striking physical characteristics, both with the ability to have highly accurate prophetic dreams. And then Zelda is hit with a serious case of deja vu upon hearing Link's name. If I didn't know any better, I'd say they weren't merely brother and sister, but actually twins.
The kingdom of Hyrule, being under the pressures of war, was a dangerous place for a potential heir to the throne. As a precautionary measure, the king and queen decided to part with their newborn son in order to ensure that if they both were to fall, there was still hope that one day, one of or both of their children would rise to the challenge and reclaim all that was lost at the hands of evil. Link, having become effectively severed from the royal family, collects the spiritual stone of the forest and embarks on his journey. Immediately upon leaving the Kokiri forest, Link is greeted by Kepora Gabora, a mysterious and wise owl. The owl somehow knows Link's name before even talking to him, which is pretty strange in hindsight. There's evidence of Kepora frequenting Kokiri Forest in the past. If we play Saria's song during certain parts of the game, she will reminisce about a few times when a mysterious bird spoke to her. This could explain how he knew Link's name already, but I have a different theory. I am well aware of the fact that Hyrule Historia claims that Kepora Gabora is supposed to be Rauru, the ancient sage, but I'd like to challenge this assumption. Hyrule Historia has many instances of incorrect lore entries, so it wouldn't surprise me if this is just yet another case of misinformation, so I'm going to make a bold claim here. Kepora Gabora is not Rauru, but instead he's actually the king of Hyrule. I understand that this might throw some people off, but hear me out. There's a gossip stone in the Sacred Forest Meadow that tells us that Kepora is the reincarnation of an ancient sage. A reincarnation. Rauru is an ancient sage. They're two different people belonging to two different time periods. Rauru never leaves the Chamber of Sages to talk to Link, but when he does wish to talk to you, he does so through telepathic visions. If he can talk to you in this manner, then why would he even need to take on the form of an owl? He even claims that his power is useless outside of the Chamber of Sages, so he wouldn't even be able to shapeshift if he did leave it. The other gossip stone in the Sacred Forest Meadow comments on how Kepora has a light-hearted personality. Rauru definitely doesn't share this trait. A young king goofing around with the Gorons, now that sounds like someone with a pretty light-hearted personality to me. If you talk to Kepora in Lake Hylia, he states that he was on his way back to Hyrule Castle and asks if you would like to catch a ride. Why would he be heading back to the castle? Unless he needed to return to the throne. Finally, the very last time that you talk to Kepora, he tells you that it's still incredible to him that the legend of a hero of time is actually true, and he didn't believe it until now. Now, why would Rauru be saying this if it were him? He is the very first person to state that you are the hero of time without a second thought. The King of Hyrule, on the other hand, has been told about these legends by the Sheikah and hinted at it through Zelda's dream. He most likely wouldn't believe it until he saw it with his very own eyes. He then states, maybe it's not my time anymore, and places the fate of the citizens of Hyrule on Link's shoulders. This could contain symbolic messaging such as a king passing down his kingdom onto his son, his role finally coming to an end. It's not exactly a new thing for kings in the Zelda series to disguise themselves in order to interact with Link. It's also not the first time that we see a character with an almost identical name, Gepora, be the father of Zelda in Skyward Sword. I don't think it's that much of a stretch to assume that Kepora Gabora is actually the king of Hyrule watching over his son as he progresses through his journey. Actually, that sort of reminds me of a different king. Could it be? I think I'll leave that up to Wiz to decide. Either way, the king seems to be quite an enigmatic individual.
Hold your horses there, Gossip Geist. We can talk to Kepora as an adult. If he's supposed to be the king, then wouldn't that mean that Ganondorf never killed the king when he invaded Hyrule Castle?
Yep, that's exactly what that means.
Okay, well, if that's what we're going with, then I might be able to explain how this could be the case. In the video over on my channel, of course.
Sounds good to me. Thanks so much for joining me today, Wiz. I couldn't have done it without you.
Anytime, friend.
Please be sure to head on over to Wiz Catches Lightning's channel to discover the fate of Ocarina of Time's king. A big thank you goes out to Moxie Watts and Jair for becoming members and supporting the channel. I truly appreciate it. And an absolutely massive thank you goes out to Florian for showing their incredible dedication to this channel. You are officially a Bonafide legend. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed yourself, there is much more to come in the future, so please subscribe and stick around for another onslaught of Zelda lore from Gossip Geist.